Take a look at this. At the end of the debate, Warren and Sanders goes to shake her hand. And she doesn't shake his hand. And there's this testy back and forth between the two where Tom Steyer looks like Tom Steyer doesn't know what's going on here. He's shocked by the whole thing. And Sanders walks away in a certain degree of disgust. Why didn't you let me lie on you? What do you mean why I didn't let you lie on me? We're in the middle of a campaign. You said I said something I didn't say. Yeah, but I don't like the fact that you didn't let me lie on you, so I'm not going to shake your hand. I'm going to walk away. I have a hypothesis, and I think this hypothesis is spot on. Why Warren leaked the story. And it would have had to have come from Warren, right? It was a private conversation between Sanders and Warren. Warren comes away saying that Sanders, or at the very least, anonymous sources who weren't in the meeting, come away saying that Sanders said a woman couldn't win. Now, this had to have been approved by Warren. This had to have been, at the very least, it came from her campaign, and that it went to CNN. Even Nate Silver comes out and says, does anybody really believe that Warren didn't leak this? Or at the very least, Warren's team didn't leak this? And then Warren gives it tacit approval by coming in and saying, Sanders, I believe that a woman could win. Sanders didn't. I don't want to talk about it now. Adding no context, trying to essentially cut it off. I just want you guys to talk about the fact that Sanders said a woman couldn't win, but I don't want to have anything else about this conversation. But yes, this conversation did take place. Sanders comes out and says, that's a lie. That never happened. Yes, we had the conversation about whether or not a woman could win. I said Trump was racist, misogynist, I'm paraphrasing, racist, misogynist, and a bigot, and he would use sexism as a weapon against a political opponent. Now, whether Warren interpreted that as a woman can't win is of paramount importance. The catch here is she would not add any additional information to it. I'm just going to leak it, and I'm just going to let you guys talk about it, but I don't want to talk about it further. Even weirder and even that much more ridiculous or ludicrous, in the New York Times, they make the point that Warren Camp says, yeah, we don't want to really have this conversation. We just leaked it. Clearly you want to have the conversation if you leaked it. Otherwise, you wouldn't leak it. You leak that information so you can have that conversation. Coming over the top afterwards with this kind of propaganda, oh, we don't really want to talk about the thing that we leaked. This is, the New York Times and these organizations should be brighter than that. CNN goes so far as to call it a fact when there were only two people in the room. That's extraordinary. One person says it didn't happen, and that person has a track record of honesty. The other person says it did without giving any additional caveats or context to it. That person does not have a track record of honesty. I'm talking about Native American Elizabeth Warren, who told a woman brazenly that her kids went to public school when her kids went to private school. Warren has a history of dishonesty. I guess that's my point. Sean King, let me just say it this way, because I'm going too far. I have a hypothesis. The entire reason that Warren leaked this story 48 hours before the debate was because she wanted CNN to cover the story so she could talk about something with a lot of media attention, with a lot of eyes on the story. Something that she believes is maybe a subcurrent that is dragging down to some degree her campaign, or perhaps maybe some of the other campaigns featuring women, which is whether or not a woman could win against Trump. The catch here is she uses Sanders and CNN as a willing prop, but uses a private conversation with Sanders in order to create a lightning rod to have the very specific conversation about whether or not a woman could win. This is outright disgusting in the way that she was willing to use a private conversation from a friend of hers in order to make this very specific point. My argument here is that the entirety of all of this, meaning the leaking of the story, the leaning into the story, all of this, has everything to do with wanting to have a conversation that she didn't necessarily want to bring up directly. Her campaign bringing up directly would not get the media attention that she would get if she tries to put a knife and backstab Sanders 3 weeks before Iowa. I'm going to make my argument and I'm going to make my point. I think I'm right. Welcome to the Soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, subscribe. You can always support. PayPal, Patreon. Warren let this story go for a period of time, but eventually comes out and says, Sanders didn't think I could win, or Sanders didn't think a woman could win. I disagree with him. That's all. Washington Post comes out with this. Two people with knowledge of the conversation at the 2018 dinner at Warren's home told the Washington Post that Warren brought up the issue by asking Sanders whether he believed a woman could win. One of the people with knowledge of the conversation said Sanders did not say a woman couldn't win, but rather that Trump would use nefarious tactics against the Democratic nominee. This is effectively what Sanders said. Yeah, I mean, think about it for the moment. Sanders pushed Warren to run in 2015. Sanders, going back 30 years ago, has clips where he's saying, yes, a woman could win. It would be very bizarre within a year that all of a sudden that somehow changes. Right here. This is Warren's camp trying to de-escalate before the debate, trying to bring down the Bernie is sexist stuff after putting out effectively Bernie is sexist. I would be careful with the sexism angle when it comes to Bernie. That could be really bad news for us. That's what they say, Warren's camp, and talking to other supporters in one of the group. I would be careful with the sexism angle when it comes to Bernie, the exchange individually. That's not what this is about, and I think it would be really bad news for us if it becomes what it's about. The staffer told the group, is that what this is about broadly? Absolutely, but no one is here to actually claim Bernie is sexist. At one point in a lengthy DM to the Twitter group on Tuesday morning, Warren's staffer description of the controversy hewed closer to Sanders' descriptions than Warren's. Claiming your word a woman can't win, flagging that she'll receive sexist attacks is something many people feel the campaign official wrote. Meaning the campaign official that was talking to the people in the group essentially trended closer to Sanders, saying, essentially making this argument about sexism and so forth in the United States and about whether a woman could win. The BuzzFeed article's at the bottom for you to read for yourself. I also want to point out Sean King making the point that Warren's team noted right here. Just spoke to a source who told me Elizabeth Warren admittedly embellished the words of Bernie Sanders to her friends after the meeting with him in 2018, saying that Bernie Sanders said a woman couldn't win, but that he never actually said the words. He never actually said the words. CNN ran with this as if it was a flat fact. A few points, and I'll be quick, swift because I want to get to the debates. And by the way, this is Sanders and Warren discussing this at the debate. In fact, more important, I'll do that in a separate video. Sanders makes his point about the fact that, look, this is ludicrous because CNN brought it up. CNN, of course, was going to bring it up. CNN could not bring it up. I want to give you what Sanders said about it because Sanders, right here, this is Sanders' point.
Told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman could not win the election?
Now, understand what just took place. And I'm going to show this in a separate video, but Sanders explains, of course, I didn't tell Elizabeth Warren that she couldn't win the race. Right here. I'm trying to get all of Sanders' piece, and I thought I saved it somewhere. All right, so let's just do this. Let's go to Warren's piece, and I'll bring back Sanders' piece in a separate video. So Sanders makes it very plainly clear that I did not say that. I tried to get Warren to run in 2015. It would be very strange if within a short period of time I changed on that very specific point. CNN, but Sanders. So you're saying that never happened. Sanders, yes, I'm saying that never happened. CNN immediately, after Sanders says that didn't happen, turns to Warren and says, so when Bernie Sanders, who just said it didn't happen, so when Bernie Sanders says that a woman couldn't win, what did you say? Listen to Warren's response. And I think this response explains it all. Now explain what I mean.
In order to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country. In order to defeat the most dangerous president in the history of our country.
So Senator Sanders, I do want to be clear here. You're saying that you never told Senator Warren that a woman could not win the election.
That is correct.
Senator Warren, what did you think when Senator Sanders told you a woman
Now
could
that's
not win the election?
outrageous. That's outrageous. Two people in the room. Two people in the room. One person said, I did not say that. I did not say that. And what he makes the point is, I said he was racist, sexist, etc. He used that against you. Instead of CNN saying, well, Sanders said he didn't say that. What were the exact words that were used in a meeting? Meaning you could go into the story in order to try to understand the larger context of what was being said. CNN didn't do that. They act as if Sanders was just lying. Let's keep going.
I disagreed. Bernie is my friend, and I am not here to try to fight with Bernie. But look, this question about whether or not a woman can be president has been raised, and it's time for us to attack it.
Right there. You raised it. You raised it. My point in this is right here. That's the reason. Here's a few points. One, why did Elizabeth Warren even ask that question? You decide to go in with a meeting with Bernie Sanders. And in that meeting with Bernie Sanders, you ask him whether or not a woman could win. Does that by definition imply one or two things? Either A, you had your doubts yourself about whether a woman could win. Otherwise, you would never ask the question. Or B, you were asking him that so you can use this later on because you knew you were going to run. Second point. The reason that Elizabeth Warren went to Sanders to talk about this is because she was likely trying to dissuade him from running. Understand what I mean. In 2015, Bernie Sanders went to Elizabeth Warren and tried to get her to run for president. Elizabeth Warren had a secret deal with Clinton going back years prior that said she would give her complete support to Clinton. And basically, she would back Clinton. So Warren was not going to run in that conversation with Sanders. But her turning around saying, do you think a woman could win? In the other day. My point is, in 2015, Sanders went to Warren to try to get her to run. She chose not to, so Sanders ran. In 2020 or 2018, whatever, Warren went to Sanders to tell him, essentially, I'm going to run. Sanders understood what she was trying to get across. And this is her way of trying to get him to stop running. That's my point. Her reasoning for going to him, this conversation that these two were having, was most likely to get across to him, I am going to run in 2020. I'm going to run in 2020. You wanted me to run in 2015. I'm going to run in 2020. This insistence, this insinuation that, hey, you don't have to run now. I strongly suspect that that's what that meeting was about. It was the political thing of trying to get him to not run in 2020. I could be wrong. But, you know, the fact that the 2015 meeting took place makes me think that her reasoning for this was to try to get across to him. I'm going to run in 2020. You don't have to run. Here's another thing. You wait until 3 weeks before the Iowa caucus in order to leak a conversation that was private between you and him that happened 2 years prior. At no point in the election did this conversation matter to you, but 3 weeks before Iowa, with a campaign that is failing miserably, plummeting in regards to polling, 10 points, 15 points in many of these polls, you leaked this on a friend of yours. Now, this private convo is strange, like I said before, since he tried to get you to run in 2015, and since there's videos of him pushing for women to run going all the way back for 30 years prior. So it's a bit bizarre. He said it didn't take place. He's been a firm supporter of women's rights. Sanders rarely calls things a lie, but he did call this one a lie. And so did people in his campaign came back and said this was a lie. This never happened. And the way that she's trying to say it happened. I never said that women couldn't win. Between the two, one is believable since he has a history of authenticity. The other one has a history of flagrant dishonesty. The point here, though, is it was leaked 2 days before this debate. Now, I said yesterday that this has to come up in a debate. It would be weird if it didn't come up. CNN is the moderator of this debate. CNN has ran with the story whole hog as if the story was true. And CNN doesn't necessarily have a good record of reflection in regards to their own failings. And so CNN has to ask this, especially since Sanders is saying that didn't happen. And Warren and CNN is reporting. I don't know how they're reporting. They can only be reporting based on what Warren said that it did. It had to come up. Warren leaks this to the organization that is going to be running the debate 2 days before the debate. Why would you leak something 2 days before the debate if you didn't want to talk about it at the debate? You tell me. You're sitting in a campaign room and you figure out, all right, we're going to leak this information. And you're leaking this information 2 days before a debate. The information has to come up in the debate. It would be weird if it didn't come up in the debate. Now, the catch here is the very specific issue here that these guys are talking about is whether or not a woman could win. But this boils down to Sanders, Sexist, that type of stuff. But whether a woman could win. Go back to the campaign guy, the person who was in the campaign saying, look, it would be bad for us to become sexism. This is more about the broader issue of whether or not a woman could win. Why? Because there's questions. One of the old polling I did earlier saying that the overwhelming majority of the public didn't think a woman could win. She wanted to talk about this issue. This is a very specific issue that she wanted to talk about. But they also was aware that if they just brought it up in the campaign, they wouldn't get as many eyes as if you create a fire and a lightning rod by attacking a friend of yours and tying it to that very specific issue. So 2 days before the debate, where you have a lot of people's eyes watching, meaning this is one of the main platforms where you have a lot of people come together to watch this particular thing, she puts it out as a leak. Then says, I don't want to talk about it. And then here, now that the issue is brought up, now that this has become part of the public discussion, now I want to make my pitch. Either it's a coincidence, and it can't be a coincidence because her team leaked it. That's kind of the point I'm getting here. The entirety of this was all about allowing and creating this moment without her saying, I'm bringing this issue up. I hope you get my point. They did it poorly. And they attacked Sanders on this and used that in order to allow this moment.
Head on. And I think the best way to talk about who can head on, not a woman can be president, has been raised, and it's time for us to attack it head on. And I think the best...
Why? Because it wasn't being attacked head on before. It was just something that was under the current that they couldn't necessarily bring up, or they didn't necessarily want to deal with directly, or they couldn't deal with directly. But now that it's brought up, that it's organically brought up, now we can talk about it directly. I'm sorry, this is utterly disgusting, and all of this was pre-planned. All of this was just, all of this was politics. She was willing to backstab, put a knife in her friend in order to create this situation where she could talk about a woman being able to win. I hope you understand my point on this. They wanted to talk about an issue about whether a woman could win. They didn't want to bring this up directly. Warren, in this case, uses a private conversation, twists that private conversation, and it says that Bernie Sanders said a woman couldn't win. This immediately gets the attention of CNN and many other media outlets that hate Sanders, runs it. CNN just so happens to be running the debate. And in the debate, because this happened like 2 days prior, CNN, of course, was going to bring it up. CNN did, in fact, bring it up. Sanders made his case about this is bullshit. This never happened. And CNN allows Warren to say, well, now that this is brought up, I'm going to address whether a woman could win directly. Why are you saying it in those terms? Because beforehand, this was this indirect thought that people had that they didn't necessarily bring up or acknowledge for various issues of political correctness. But now that you've put a knife in Sanders and said that he's the poster boy for this, now you can talk about it directly. This is disgusting politics. She used her friend, quote unquote, Bernie Sanders, as a prop to talk about an issue that she thought needed to be discussed, and using him as a prop to get the most eyes on it to do it. Meaning using her friend as a lightning rod in order to make this pitch that a woman could win. She used a private conversation as opposition research to not just attempt to damage the Sanders campaign, meaning, yes, it was also to make this pitch with the simultaneous effect of trying to damage Sanders' campaign. You got what you wanted. You got your platform to make this pitch to the American public. What you lost, however, is also important. You lost any level of trust From the standpoint of the Sanders team, you lost any level of trust or support from his base. You lost all notions of integrity. Not to mention, you created a situation where your habitual dishonesty and rank opportunism, which is in and of itself is bad enough. My point is, you were willing to use Sanders in this way. There is no circumstance, none, even when he was at his worst, where he would have been willing to use you as a prop in this way in order to accomplish some kind of political objective. That's what makes this that much more disgusting. If it's between who do you believe, meaning he said, she said, well, I tend to believe the person that has been far more honest as opposed to the person that has flagrantly pretended to be somebody else this entire race. You can look at the Medicare for All stuff as recent notions that she is willing to lie in order for political expedience. If you honestly believe Warren is pushing for Medicare for All, I have a bridge on Mars to sell you this notion of 3 years. It's nonsense. I guess my point is, one person has a history of flagrant dishonesty. Her term as a corporate lawyer that she tried to describe as some kind of benefit to society. Her term, whether or not she lost her job because of pregnancy. I mean, even this notion of trying to call herself saying that her kids goes to public schools. Like, she has a history of dishonesty in her own book. She talks about a conversation coming up with this notion of movements, like the 99% and everything else, and her injecting herself into it, but later on in a moment of reflection saying, God, I sounded so pompous. Why? Because she was embellishing exactly what she's doing here now for political effect. It only makes it that much worse because she's using this to hit somebody who's supposedly a friend of hers and using that person as a prop while trying to damage their campaign. The entirety of this was about getting this platform with a lot of eyes on it to force CNN to ask this very specific question about whether or not a woman could win so she can deal with it and hit it directly. That's what all of this was about. I don't trust her. Like, share, subscribe. I'll be right back.